morning. Scripture reading this morning is from 1 Peter, chapter 2, verses 13 through 25. For the Lord's sake, accept the authority of every human institution, whether of the emperor as supreme, or of governors as sent by him, to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right, you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. As servants of God, live as free people, yet do not use your freedom as a pretext for evil. Honor everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. The example of Christ's suffering. Slaves, accept the authority of your masters with all deference, not only those who are kind and gentle, but also those who are harsh. For it is a credit to you if, being aware of God, you endure pain while suffering unjustly. If you endure when you are beaten for doing wrong, what credit is that? But if you endure when you do right and suffer for it, you have God's approval. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin and no deceit was found in his mouth. When he was abused, he did not return abuse. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that, free from sins, we might live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were going astray like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. Word of God for everyone. Praise God.
Take a moment of prayer together. For this day we give you thanks, O Lord. And now may the words of my lips and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, you who are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. This week I went into the local nurseries up there where we live and ordered some topsoil and also a load of mulch. And they told me the price of it, and I said, ouch. And then he said, no, the real ouch will be when you have to spread this. And so they came and yesterday morning, quite early, to deliver it, and or one of the loads, and so drove into the driveway, and then the truck sat there for quite a while, and I couldn't figure out why, and then he drove off. And I said to Laura, I said, did he dump anything? Did I miss it? And she said, no, I don't think so. And so I called the nursery and I said, you know, your truck was here to deliver, but he didn't leave anything. And then the nursery owner apologized. He said, well, I realized after he had got loaded and he'd got sent that before he dumped it, that he was delivering a darker mulch. You wanted the lighter mulch, and he had the dark load of mulch. And so I asked him not to deliver it. And I said, okay, that's, you know, would have been okay. Mulch is mulch. But I thought that's how life is. Sometimes we want something to be delivered, and we get something else. Somebody once said the word B-U-T, but is a powerful word. A person exercises, but gets heart disease. A person takes antioxidants very carefully, but gets cancer. person spends time, or a couple does, with their couples, with their children. Do a wonderful job playing with their children. But their SAT scores stink. Or as one person said, I went to an Ivy League college, but I'm stuck in a dead-end middle management position. I order one mulch, but another one comes. We never know. That's so much like life. It is life. Is that different things happen to us that we just never figured. I read about, it's hard to believe, but I've driven sometimes when it's been extremely foggy. I remember traveling with my dad in upper Michigan. And you couldn't see the road. I don't know how Dad drove. And cars would come whizzing by us. And a lot of times when you're driving in that heavy fog, you move toward the center lane because you don't know where the ditch is. In Germany, there was extreme fog, and the person could not see much. So they drove more toward the center line. He stuck his head out the window so that he could get a little better sight. Another car came at about the same speed as it, very slowly. And believe it or not, the other person had their head out. And the heads hit. The cars didn't get a scratch on them. And both men were taken to the hospital with head injuries. Life happens. And life is oftentimes filled with disappointments. And it doesn't seem to matter who we are or what we do. Sister Avila was one of the saints of the early church, or of the church in the middle 1600s, and later canonized. And she was, I said, Sister Teresa of Avila, I meant. She was walking in northern Spain with 50 other nuns up this path, and they had to cross over on a narrow bridge over this body of water. And they got out on it. I guess all 50 of them were on it. And you can guess what happened. The bridge broke. And they all crashed into the water. And nobody was seriously injured or anything. They were able to swim to shore or help one another to get to shore. And she had a good sense of humor. And she said, looking up toward heaven, she said, Lord, if this is the way you treat your friends, it's little wonder that you have so many foes. And there are times like that when that comes to us. Different things happen to us. Actress Helen Hayes talked about walking down one of the streets of Paris with Mary Martin, a gifted singer, dancer, Broadway star. And Mary Martin had gotten a brand new designer suit. And a pigeon flew overhead. And Mary Martin's response was, she says, for some people, Lord, they sing. Disappointments, shocks happen to us. And Philip Yancey dealt with this in a book called Disappointments with God. A good writer, and trying to struggle about what do we do with the disappointments that come our way in life, because we don't look for them, but they come. Those buts. chapter of Job that he wanted to explore in his book. So he thought, who do I know that is like Job, that suffered so much? You know, Job was that character in the Bible who had everything and lost everything, and his wife did too, for that matter. And so he thought of a friend of his that he had known for some time, who had gone through a number of difficulties, and his name was Douglas. And Douglas was a psychotherapist. And so he called him up and said, could we sit and talk for a while? I'm writing a book. I'd like to talk to you about life. And this Douglas, as a psychotherapist, had a lucrative practice in a very wealthy part of a community in which he lived. And they moved into the inner city with his family. And he gave up his practice and he worked with poor families and some who couldn't pay. And he still worked with them. And it wasn't long after he did this that his wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And when she began the chemotherapy and everything, and it usually leaves everybody sick, you know, when that happens. But she really violently became ill in receiving the treatments. So he pretty much had to take care of the family at that time. A very stressful time for the whole family. And then the cancer spread into her lungs. And she had to get other types of treatment. A little bit after that, the family was in their automobile, and a drunk driver came across the median and slammed into them. Their daughter was thrown into the window and suffered severe lacerations of her face. His wife was in the car. She did not get hurt additionally. His head either hit the steering wheel or the dashboard came down, and his sight was affected, so he began to see double after that. He couldn't walk downstairs without stumbling, and he had to give up reading, which was one of his passions. And all these things come tumbling at him pretty close at the same time after he'd given up this lucrative practice to go to the inner city. And so Douglas, as they were sitting at the breakfast table with this interview, he said, "Tell me, what would you say to people who are disappointed with God?" And Douglas thought for a minute, stroked his beard, and finally he looked at Yancey and said, "You know, Philip, I don't think I've ever been disappointed with God." And it shocked Yancey. He was amazed, and of course, because he had specifically chosen Douglas because he thought of all the people he knew, he was the most likely one to be disappointed or even angry with God. And he said, "How can this be that you're not disappointed with God?" And Douglas said, "You know, Philip, I learned a long time ago, and especially through this accident, not to confuse God with life." Is life unfair? You bet. My life has been unfair. What has happened to my wife, what has happened to my daughter, what has happened to me is unfair. But I think God feels exactly the same way. I think God is grieved and hurt by what that drunk driver did to our family as much as I am. Don't confuse God with life. As I read the Bible, he went on, especially the Old Testament, I noticed that those people were able to separate the physical reality of their lives from the spiritual reality of their relationship with God. And they began to talk about some of the characters. Daniel, who loved God, thrown into prison with lions. Noah, who loved God, but all of his friends washed away in the flood. Job, and the suffering that he went through. And then finally, Jesus on the cross. And what did he, if you want to look at life as treating unfairly? Life can be unfair. But God is what Douglas said. And Yancey went on to write. Douglas was right about one thing. The best example in life is the crucifixion of Christ. The writer of 1 Peter continues, "To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his step. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. And when they hurled their insults at him, he didn't respond in kind." I thought about that this week, disappointments, and how easy it is to say life is unfair, or how easy it is to say God is unfair when life is unfair. And I bet we could have a list of people, and it wouldn't take us too long to list the people that we would want to say, but they were good people. They are good people. But they came down with cancer, or they had a heart attack, or life was cut short. I don't know the friend, the 23-year-old, but, and we could do that litany, and if we didn't separate that life is not the same as God, we would end up being disappointed with God. And wrongly so. I love his passage here, what Douglas understood. He said, "I believe God grieves with me, just like I grieve." And I've used this quote before, like Henry Coffin Sloan, when his son drove off one of the bridges in Boston and drowned in the Charles River. And he said, God was the first one to weep when that happened. When we come to communion, it is a way of remembering that Jesus gave his life for us. God took his life, but Jesus gave his life so that we would have a relationship with God. And always be reminded of that need in our lives for that relationship. I know when we take communion, I'm guessing that it isn't always a holy moment for you. I've had those times in my life when I say, "Oh, communion, this will be a really long service." When I'm at a better place, it is that I'm participating with people who love Jesus, who love God, and who are like me, searching and hungry and needing relationship with Jesus. And so I invite us as we participate this morning in this meal to realize we come as a community. And we come, all of us, out of a community where life is oftentimes unfair.